Resuming debate, the honourable member for Calgary Centre.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and it's my honour tonight to rise and speak to this filibuster that these people are claiming it is at this point in time. But we've got a number of motions that we have to address through committee processes here.
Honourable member for Cowichan, the honourable member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. I just wonder if you could ask the member to clarify what is meant by these people and what it means by.
This is not a point of order; it's a point of debate. The honourable member for Calgary Centre.
Madam Speaker, and I'm speaking about the bill in front of us at this point in time, and I apologize that my colleague doesn't know that. But this is and I'm speaking about this since it arose over a year ago.
I have another point of order. The honourable member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
Madam Speaker, could I get a summary of what we're debating then? If the Speaker feels I don't know what it is, could they clarify what it is?
You know, this is a point of debate, the honourable member for Calgary Centre, and I just want to remind members to please be mindful on the language that they use and how they use the language so that it doesn't disrupt the House. The honourable member for Calgary Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll start over if I may. We're here tonight to debate about exactly what we're trying to ram through the House of Commons at this point in time regarding a bill that the Liberals have put on the table here that over a year ago, and I've spoken to many groups in Calgary about what this legislation represents, and I've been speaking to it since it came, because there are all kinds of problems with this legislation, many of which have been exacerbated by events that have transpired since it was put on the table over a year ago. But effectively, what we're talking about here is a federal governance engagement and accountability framework to guide the government's efforts over time. It's based on false narratives, I can say that. But before I move forward any further, Madam Chair, I'd like to let you know that I'm splitting my time tonight with a member from Portage Lisgar. There's a lot of expert opinions being invented that move this bill forward. Like, you can seek an expert opinion, pay for it, and make sure it says what you want it to say. And this government is very good at that. And we found lots of ways where they're spending hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars in making sure they get the right opinions in the right place and put the money in the right pockets. But it's a brazen attempt to unilaterally move into traditionally provincial jurisdiction, and that is labour. The labour that's actually being produced in the provinces of Canada. You think about how provinces actually fund the post-secondary institutions to make sure that jobs in demand are there 4 years hence, 5 years hence, 6 years hence. This is the province's job. This will be another muddying of the water as far as who's responsible for the outcome of delivering labour in Canada for the jobs we need going forward. We have enough of this muddling in Canada right now. More of it is not going to accomplish anything. It's going to lead to more stalemate in every province. And I'm dead surprised at the Bloc Québécois not opposing this openly, because it is a gross movement into provincial jurisdiction. And it is their raison d'etre here in this House of Commons to make sure the federal government does not move into provincial jurisdiction. But I guess their hatred for the oil and gas sector, which funds most of which happens in this country, makes them overrule their raison d'etre, which is making sure that provinces have their responsibilities and the federal government stays in its lane. But it's going to advance funding for skill development towards sustainable jobs, post-secondary training. But at this point in time in my province, the federal government, through transfers, already gives $1.8 billion to the provinces to make sure that they develop those jobs. It's partially funded by the federal government through Canadian taxpayers that fund the federal government. And part of that comes back to the province of Alberta. But for industry, it means a double effort because they're already working with the provincial authorities to make sure that we've got the labour going forward. Now you've got to make sure that you got the federal government on side as well as the provincial government. Well, it's double the effort, double the work. We've got to make sure that we make things more streamlined and we stop creating uncertainty for every business in Canada, for every industry in Canada, but primarily for our natural resource industries. But one of the key actions I really like in this bill, and you can read it in the preamble, of course, identify, one of the jobs, of course, is for the federal government to identify what data is currently tracked across the federal government and other accessible sources. That's actually what they're going to spend money doing. Find out what data they already have. Now, this is a ridiculous use of legislation. They want to motivate investors with a thing called sustainable finance. Well, Madam Speaker, you know I've got a background in finance. Sustainable finance is an anachronism. There's only finance. There's only numbers. You can't monkey around with numbers and make the equation different. It is fabrication of the highest order. Get past it and realize at the end, the math has to work for everybody. But it allows us to collaborate and lead on the world stage. What a joke. We don't collaborate. The federal government doesn't collaborate with any of the provinces at this point in time, except when it's doling out checks to its favorite friends. But it does not lead on the world stage. As a matter of fact, many people in the world internationally are looking at Canada's diminishing role in the world and wondering what's happened to Canada. What's happened to Canada after 8 years of this government is detestable on the world stage. We've got to get better outcomes and better recognition in the world about how we can contribute to the solutions the world needs at this point in time. There's an issue of accountability as well, because we know this government is not good at accountability. We've got to find a way to become more accountable, and that means staying in your lane. Where are we actually having an impact, and what do we actually have to do to make sure we get results for the country going forward? Well, the legislation says it's going to guide a cohesive approach to climate energy security. I don't think the government even knows what it's talking about when it talks about energy security. I think it's been making it up as far as its solutions for the climate, because it continues to fail at every goal it ever sets. But it didn't go into this whole notion of what is the definition of a sustainable job. So let's see that. A sustainable job in this legislation will remain evergreen in order to evolve over time through consultation with key partners and the public. So they don't even know what they're aiming for here. It is the most aimless legislation available, and yet they want to continue to move into provincial jurisdiction to basically muddy the waters in getting results. Now, the input on this, federal efforts must respect provincial jurisdiction, and they don't. None of this respects provincial jurisdiction. And I beseech my colleagues in the Bloc Québécois to recognize that, because they're about to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. Industry talks about access to safe and reliable and affordable energy being the most important thing for Canada. Countries without safe, reliable, and secure energy are effectively going down the rabbit hole of non-existence in the world. They're looking for solutions. Canada provides that solution. We've got to get ahead of this and make sure we understand where the world is and where Canada is. And frankly, when you talk to the Canadian public about this bill, they're saying, what is a sustainable job? What is a just transition? Is the just transition like happened in the coal industry in Alberta? And let's go over those numbers, because those numbers are illustrative, Madam Chair. Those numbers indicated that the government spent $185 million accomplishing almost nothing. It set up its own commission. It set up its own just transition for Canadian coal workers and community in 2018. 11-person panel of experts, $185 million in funding through 2025. So far, $52 million spent, 27 of that in my province of Alberta, $27 million. But that included $18 million to build a road, far from any of the coal plants. It was just a slush fund. And this government seems pretty good at building slush funds. But case in point, take a look at Hanna, Alberta. Hanna, Alberta, its unemployment rate went in 2011 from 4%, this is where there was a coal plant in Alberta, 4% to 10% unemployment in 2021, the highest unemployment in Alberta. What's worse with that? You think about the workers there. What happens to them when they lose their jobs? Well, when the whole town loses their jobs, you get unemployment up to 10%. The houses become worth much less. So the average house price in 2016 was about $177,000 in a rural town in Alberta. In 2022, that same house was worth $65,000. What's the number one savings a family has? It's their home. And when your home value goes down by over $100,000, almost 2/3, you recognize that's value you will take a long time to get back. And that also means there's no tax loss selling there because it doesn't actually get any tax relief in that respect. So it's something we have to make sure we've got our eyes on here. Don't replicate the same disaster this government has had with the coal industry. Is there any indication that the federal government has any confidence in this realm? No, there's not. They don't know this at all. They're trying to invent it. They're trying to say, we want this jurisdiction now because we want to have our thumb on the scale about where we get to see jobs going forward in Canada. It's not enough to continue to spill money out of their jeans in certain sectors that they think are going to be more important, but are really the government putting their thumb on the scale again to try and determine where the jobs should be in Canada. Those jobs aren't anywhere without private sector investment. We're a disaster as far as the world goes because we've got to continue to spend government money because private sector investment is not happening in this country. It's not happening because of the uncertainty created by this government. And this bill adds to that uncertainty. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? Honorable député Lac Saint-Louis.
Mr. Speaker, you know, when I speak to constituents about Parliament, often they focus on question period, and they say, well, you know, it's so chaotic. You know, we lose faith in the system. And I tell them, I reassure them by saying, well, the real work in this place often gets done in committee. That's where amendments are proposed and so on. I substituted for one meeting at committee, and it was an absolute circus, Mr. Speaker. I would have expected to see even those who oppose this legislation propose amendments that could then be debated. I didn't see that. So my question to the honourable member is, why was the opposition not doing its job in terms of submitting substantive amendments to try to get its point across?
The honourable member for Calgary Centre.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the member across the way. I was a member of his committee once, and he was a really good chair of that committee, one of the best chairs I've had to work with on the Liberal side of the House. But let me say that when you get rulings from the Supreme Court of Canada in the midst of legislation here that more or less say, no matter what, this legislation moving forward is going to face a Supreme Court challenge, it is time to revisit the legislation, bring it back, rewrite it so it is actually pertinent and might go somewhere. At this point in time, we're going to spin our wheels in this House of Commons going through legislation which is likely going to be overturned. That's the point we're trying to get here. Get back to work, or we're actually accomplishing something for Canadians. Thank you.
Questions et commentaires, l'honorable député de Mirabel. Sorry.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mon collègue, que j'apprécie beaucoup, a utilisé la bonne vieille technique conservatrice, c'est d'utiliser la désinformation. Parce que c'est effectivement un projet de loi qui viole les compétences du Québec. Et c'est pour ça qu'on a voté contre 2 fois. On a voté contre. On demande au gouvernement fédéral à ce qu'il reconnaisse les commissions des partenaires des marchés du travail, les tables sectorielles. Et on demande également à ce que les ententes Québec-Ottawa sur la formation de la main-d'œuvre soient respectées. On ne peut pas être plus contre une intrusion dans le champ de compétences de Québec que ça. On a voté contre 2 fois. Alors, Monsieur le Président, puisque le collègue n'avait pas l'air de le savoir, je me demande si lui, aujourd'hui, il est prêt à solennellement s'engager, ainsi que son parti, à appuyer le Bloc québécois à chaque fois qu'on continuera dans l'avenir à défendre les compétences du Québec.
Oui. Je parle solennellement à l'honorable député de Calgary Centre.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Si j'ai fait une erreur, je suis très désolé, mais j'ai entendu dire le discours de son collègue qui indiquait qu'il était pour le projet de loi ici. Et moi, mais je suis certain qu'il a dit qu'il était pour la législation parce que je le connais bien. Et il n'aime pas le secteur pétrolier et gazière, surtout à l'Alberta, mais je ne sais pas exactement pourquoi, parce qu'on a discuté les faits autour du secteur pétrolier. Mais si j'ai fait une erreur, s'il était contre le projet de loi, mais je suis désolé. Mais est-ce que ça c'est correct? Mais je suis bien désolé. Mais j'ai entendu dire le discours de son collègue et Peut-être j'ai mal entendu quelque chose.
Continuing commentaire, and the honourable member for Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member. Mr. Speaker, we know that workers are asking to be part of this process of a necessary transition. We're in a climate crisis. There's a transition that's required. And what they're asking for is to be part of this discussion. There's been jobs being lost. There's 45,000 jobs in the energy section that's already been lost, with at least 1,500 more being lost this year. We know that there's many more jobs expected to be lost while the oil and gas industry racks up record profits. And what I'm trying to understand is, does the member agree that workers deserve to have a voice in this process? And if yes, why are we seeing the Conservatives blocking important legislation and blocking committee where those voices can come forward so that we can see a path moving forward that involves those workers that are impacted? Thank you.
The honourable member for Calgary Centre, and a quick answer.
Thank you, and I thank my colleague for the question. And we talked about the jobs lost in Canadian energy. And the jobs lost in Canadian energy since 2015 are a result of government policy. It's government policy that's caused the bulk of Canadian workers in the natural resource sector, to leave their jobs, not of their own accord. They've wanted these jobs. They're some of the most productive jobs in Canada, the most value-added jobs in Canada, and yet they've been thrown under the bus by policies of this government. You take a look at the Canadian dollar, and the Canadian dollar is no longer moving up with the price of oil around the world because money isn't flowing into Canada. It goes somewhere else. I'll tell my colleague that, 8 years ago, there was no oil being produced in Guyana. And now Guyana is almost 1 million barrels a day because that money's not coming into Canada, and our dollar, as a result, stays low. So we've got to make sure that workers are being encouraged to work in these productive sectors, but also that they're paid appropriately and that they're paid in money that actually means something around the world, as opposed to a devaluing currency as we've had under this government.